When Germany invaded Poland on the 1st of September 1939, Berlin did not shake with explosions. There were no air raids, no ruins in the streets, no fire in the sky. Instead, the war arrived quietly, carried by radios, newspapers, and the sudden movement of thousands of soldiers through the city. That morning, Berliners woke to the sound of announcements, not sirens. Radios spoke with certainty and confidence. The government declared that Germany was acting in defense. The word war was used carefully, wrapped in reassurance. Many people listened in silence. Some believed it. Some pretended to. Within days, the rhythm of the city changed. Train stations became the most emotional places in Berlin. Soldiers moved through the platforms in endless lines. Some were barely out of school. Others were fathers with children clinging to their coats. Officially, they were leaving for duty. Unofficially, no one knew how long they would be gone, or if they would return at all. There were no grand public goodbyes. No dramatic speeches on loudspeakers. Just quiet embraces. Heavy bags. Short sentences that meant much more than they said. Berlin in 1939 was still a modern, busy capital. Trams rang through intersections. Factories worked day and night. Shops were open. Cinemas showed films. Cafes were full. If someone had walked through the city without listening to the radio, they might not have immediately realized that Europe was at war. But people felt it anyway. Food began to change. Not suddenly, but noticeably. Butter was measured. Meat became harder to find. Coffee turned into substitutes. Sugar was limited. The government introduced ration cards. At first, people joked about them. Then they stopped joking. The war had not destroyed Berlin, but it had entered every kitchen. Children collected scrap metal for school campaigns. Tin, wire, broken tools. They were told it was for the nation. They did it with excitement, turning duty into a game. Parents watched with mixed emotions. Pride on the surface. Fear underneath. Schools changed too. Geography became more important than literature. Maps of Europe covered classroom walls. Teachers spoke about borders more than about poems. History lessons stopped near the present, as if the future had become too dangerous to describe. Public speech grew more careful. By the end of 1939, Berlin had learned how to lower its voice. People still talked in cafes, but not as freely. Certain topics disappeared from conversations. Not because they vanished, but because they became dangerous. Stories circulated quietly. About people who had been arrested for careless jokes. About neighbors who disappeared after being reported. About letters that suddenly stopped arriving from soldiers at the front. Official news was filled with victories. Behind closed doors, people compared what they heard on the radio with what they heard from relatives in uniform. The two stories did not always совпадать. Poland fell quickly. The government called it success. But Berlin saw the returning wounded. Trains that arrived full returned less full. Funerals multiplied. Still, the city lived. In early 1940, Berlin did not look like a city under threat. There were no ruins. No blackened streets. No civilians in shelters. That would come later. For now, the war existed mainly as a pressure inside people's thoughts. At night, lights still shone in windows. Street lamps were still bright. People still walked after sunset without fear of the sky. But something invisible had changed, the sense of time. Nobody planned far ahead anymore. People no longer talked about holidays next year. Or long-term goals. They spoke in weeks. In months. Life became shorter in its expectations. Then came the Western Campaign. In April and May 1940, Germany attacked Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. For Berlin, this phase of the war felt different. Victory followed victory at a terrifying speed. Each morning newspapers announced new advances. Paris was taken in June. It shocked the world, and even many in Germany. France had fallen faster than anyone expected. In Berlin, flags appeared again in windows. But the mood was not the same as before. There was less excitement. Less celebration. Victory now felt heavy, not joyful. People understood, even if they did not say it aloud, the faster the war expanded, the larger it would eventually become. And now, for the first time, Berliners heard one name again and again. Britain. Unlike Poland. Unlike France. Britain did not fall. The air war over England began in the summer of 1940. Berlin newspapers described massive air battles. The population followed every report. People gathered around radios in the evenings, listening to updates about planes, cities, and losses. But something was different now. For the first time, Berliners understood: if aircraft could reach London, then aircraft could also reach Berlin. This realization did. The year 1941 began in Berlin without explosions, without ruins, without the sound of falling buildings. Yet the city no longer felt untouched. The war had wrapped itself around daily life so completely that it no longer felt like something happening somewhere else. By January, rationing had become routine. People no longer asked whether something would be available in shops. They asked when. Butter was rare. Meat was carefully divided. Eggs appeared only occasionally. Coffee was a memory, replaced by bitter substitutes. Bread was dark and dense. Sugar was tightly controlled. Food queues stretched along streets in the early mornings. People stood silently, wrapped in coats, looking at the pavement instead of each other. Conversations were short and cautious. Nobody wanted to be overheard complaining too loudly. Berlin had learned to stand in lines. The factories never slept. By 1941, the entire industrial heart of the city had been reoriented toward war production. Aircraft parts, vehicles, uniforms, ammunition, everything moved in a single direction. Workers labored 12-hour shifts. Women replaced men who had gone to the front. Teenagers were pulled into auxiliary work. Night shifts became common. The hum of machinery filled districts that had once gone quiet after sunset. The city was building a war it had not yet fully felt. Street life continued, but it looked different. More uniforms. More wounded. More limping men with empty sleeves pinned to their coats. More women walking alone. Berlin streets still bustled, but the faces in the crowd had changed. There was less spontaneity, less color, less laughter. Smiles appeared out of habit now, not from joy. In apartments, radios remained on for hours. Families listened to news from multiple fronts: North Africa, the Atlantic, the Balkans, the sky over Britain. Every report added another invisible layer of pressure to Berlin's air. Victory announcements sounded impressive. Casualty numbers did not. The balance between official optimism and private doubt grew thinner with every month. Then, in June 1941, the war expanded in a way that Berliners immediately understood would change everything. Germany invaded the Soviet Union. This was no longer a distant European conflict. This was a war across an entire continent. The scale of it was impossible to understand at first. Newspapers printed endless arrows on maps. Radios spoke of vast advances. Thousands of kilometers. Entire regions captured. Entire armies destroyed. Again, victory was the official word. But even loyal listeners felt the size of what had begun. This was not a war of months. This was a war that would consume years. The train stations changed again. Now, even more soldiers departed. Trains left constantly. Entire platforms became temporary military zones. Civilian travel became difficult. Soldiers replaced passengers. Military cargo replaced suitcases. For Berlin families, Farewells became routine. The exception was no longer departure. The exception was return. Letters from the Eastern Front arrived irregularly. Some were cheerful, written in an attempt to sound brave. Others were short, sparse, heavy with things unsaid. Many stopped arriving altogether. The lists of the dead in newspapers grew longer. People searched them not with curiosity, but with fear. Children in Berlin scarcely remembered a time without war now. They had grown up with ration cards in their pockets and maps on their classroom walls. They knew the sounds of sirens from drills. They understood uniforms better than fashion. Their childhood was measured in campaigns and fronts. Playgrounds still existed. But the games were darker. No longer pretending, now they rehearsed. Parents found themselves correcting their children's imaginary strategies without fully realizing what they were doing. Berlin did not panic in 1941. But it no longer relaxed either. Every family had an emergency plan. Every building had a cellar prepared. Every household had a bag ready with documents, food, water, and clothing. Blackout rules were now strict and constant. Even though Berlin had not yet been attacked from the air, the city lived as if it could be at any moment. Street lamps were dim. Windows were sealed every night. Any light that escaped could bring inspection. Inspection could bring punishment. Civil defense patrols moved through neighborhoods after dark. Their footsteps echoed on empty streets. Beneath the surface, fear became organized. Yet strangely, cultural life did not disappear. Concerts continued. Theaters staged performances. Films were shown nightly. Berliners filled the seats. Not because they were careless, but because they needed something that still felt human. Inside darkened cinemas, for 90 minutes, they could forget the ration lines, the casualties, the Eastern Front, the Atlantic, the rumors, the growing uncertainty. For 90 minutes, the war did not exist. Continued in the next video.